Hey everybody, and welcome to my brand new series called Storytime with JRP. Tune in every single day as we will read a couple pages from my book, Laurence Grey, Secret of the Lost Roanoke Colony. The book gets its inspiration from the real Roanoke colony that went missing in the late 1600s, which was a group of settlers that vanished without a trace, and to this day, no one knows what happened to them. So this book is a modern investigation on what could have happened and if it was perhaps more serious than we could have possibly imagined. So let's get into chapter 1 right now, shall we? Professor Laurence Grey graduated from Yale with a master's degree in historical studies. He also got a bachelor's in archaeology, and he is currently a deputy on the Hartford, Connecticut police force. He was just arriving to his house after a hard day's work at HCPF when his son Jason also got home on the school bus. Lawrence's wife and Jason's mother, Denise, recently passed away from lung cancer. In fact, today was the one-year anniversary of her death. Jason was only 13 when that happened. Now 14, the memory of that tragic event was still fresh in his mind. Maybe something would happen that could brighten the mood. Jason ran towards the house, ignoring his dad, who was still getting out of his Porsche. "Jason," called his dad Lawrence. "Jason!" But Jason was already in the house. Seconds later, a light turned on in a window on the second floor. Lawrence was puzzled as to why Jason was in such a rush. He made his way upstairs and knocked lightly on the door. "Jason," asked Grey, "can I come in?" A faint mumble from inside the door was enough permission for Grey, and he walked in. Jason was sitting on his bed, crying. Lawrence ran to his bedside and put his arm around Jason. "Jason, what's wrong?" he asked. "They don't believe me," cried Jason. I keep telling them, but all they do is laugh at me." Whoa, Jason, slow down," said Lawrence. "Let's start from the beginning, shall we?" Jason wiped his eyes and said, "Bullies at school. I keep telling them it means something." "What means something?" pressed Grey. "Oh, yeah, the test," said Jason. "I took a test on which colonies existed in the late 1700s. On the test, I circled Roanoke." Then, puzzled, Lawrence said, "But son, surely you know that Roanoke disappeared in the late 1600s, not 1700s. "No, Dad, that's not the point. Compare the words Croton. Remember Croton, and it was spelled on a tree? That's all that was left of the colony. Compare that word with the name of the colony, Roanoke. Then you can take letters from both of those words. What can you spell?" "It spells R-A-N. Ran. They didn't disappear, Dad. They escaped." "Escaped?" queried Laurence Grey. "What do you mean, son?" "Well, Dad," explained Jason, "the word ran, taken from both Croton and Roanoke, clearly implies that those colonists were trying to send a message. Since there would have been some debris if there was a fire or a war, and there wasn't any, it seems likely that the only alternative is that they packed up and left. It might have been that they were looking for a new land or something, but the point is that a colony can't just disappear. 300 people with livestock and housing can't just go away." Grey thought for a moment and said, "So if all this is true, isn't there more than one explanation as to their disappearance?" "What do you mean, Dad?" asked Jason. "Well, maybe that since the secret word spells ran," began Lawrence, "they were forced off their land, perhaps by some unknown faction." "Well, shouldn't there have been some sort of record on that in the history books?" inquired Jason. Lawrence shrugged. "Well, you'd think so, but maybe the government is covering it up for whatever reason. It could be anything." "You might be right," agreed Jason. Lawrence got off the bed and walked to Jason's door. "Well, it's pretty cool that you figured that out, Jason, the secret word and all. Unfortunately, that all happened 350 years ago. And you know what? Just don't worry about this, Hey, I'd like to know what happened to the colony just as much as the next guy, but there's honestly nothing we can do." "You're right, Dad," said Jason. "I don't know why I got so into this." "Not a problem," said Grey. "It was nice to have a father-son talk." Grey closed the door when Jason said, "Hey, Dad, you know today is the one-year anniversary." Yeah, I know, son," interrupted Lawrence. "But we'll be okay. Okay? We'll be just fine." Lawrence shut the door and went to bed. So did Jason. In bed, all the talk about the Roanoke colony got Grey thinking. After all, he was a historian. Maybe Jason was onto something. "I guess there's no way to really know what happened," he thought. "But I wonder." 5 a.m. the next morning, Laurence Grey got up to go to work. Besides working for the police in the latter half of the day, he also worked as a history teacher at the local Hartford Learning Center for Boys, which stands for HLCB. As he drove to work, he listened to the 6 o'clock news. It was Brian Williams from Channel 7, on the radio for some reason. He was saying, "And so that problem is still unresolved. On to other news. A leak from Washington, D.C. has uncovered some secret letters. Letters which apparently were from the 1650s government of colonies that were written to the famous Roanoke Colony, a colony which disappeared a mere 1.5 years after the date on those letters. Not much was revealed to us as to what the letters contained. The one major news bit is that they did not disappear. They were ordered to leave the premises by the government. As to where they went, it is very unclear. However, one sentence in the letter that was revealed to us states, "Proceed to the fourth colony." Now, we're unaware of that sentence's meaning. There's obviously much more to the letters than what was leaked to us, but our source says that it was almost impossible to get even this knowledge, since apparently those letters are top secret. Anyway, as to the other news, tomorrow is National Nutcase Day, and Grey turned off the radio. That's very strange, he thought, and Jason thought they ran away. Just then, Laurence Grey had a revelation that would eventually start him on the journey of a lifetime. At work, which is a library, he went straight to a computer and Googled the word "ran." All he got was links to the recent physical events. Recent physical events? Yeah, I wrote this a while ago, so okay. He tried Googling Roanoke. There were various sites about the colony, but certainly no new information. Then he Googled Roanoke plus Croton equals ran. Suddenly his computer went black, then white, then blue, then a flurry of stripes, then it went back to black again. Then a welcome screen appeared. It asked for a password. Grey tried fourth colony. It worked. A computerized voice said, "Welcome to the home of RAN, Relocations Agents National." Laurence Grey was beyond shocked. He quickly covered his mouth to keep himself from shouting. After all, this is a library. Grey couldn't believe it. The phrase "ran" wasn't an allusion to colonists running away. It was an acronym for a secret government organization. Grey couldn't wait to tell Jason, but he was still at work, so he continued to explore what was apparently a top-secret government website. What was so weird is why the password was so easy, and why a website made for something like this that occurred over 200 years ago, before the internet was even invented. As he explored the website, little was he aware the massive heap of trouble he was getting himself into. After 10 hours of work at the library and 8 hours at the police station, Laurence Grey got to his home at 12 midnight. As he got out of his car, Grey thought he heard a rustle in the bushes. Ignoring it, he went upstairs after entering his house. He got in bed as quickly as he could. After all, it was midnight. But just when things were starting to look up, the SWAT team came in. Doo-doo. Remember I used to do that in my early movies? Okay, Laurence Grey leaped 10 feet out of his bed when an entire company of SWAT soldiers knocked down his door and came gushing in. All immediately pointed their guns at Grey, the glare of the flashlights making it hard for him to see. One of them said, "Freeze!" and another said, "Hands behind your head!" and a third walked in with Jason, the latter handcuffed. Finally, a large-build, bulky, balding man in a suit walked into the room. The man was studying Grey, as if the latter was a test subject or something. A SWAT man started reading Grey's rights, when suddenly Grey had had enough. He defiantly stepped out of the bed. SWAT's now all trained guns on him even more. "What is all this?" demanded Grey. "I'm with the HCPF, and I think you've caught the wrong guy." Then the balding man said, "Sir, you're the international terrorist, not me." Now Grey was completely confused. International terrorist? Were they nuts? Suddenly realizing everyone was still staring at him, he declared, "I completely deny that charge. I demand that you release me and my son at once." The balding man cuffed him anyway. "Sorry, Pops, not today. We got all the proof we need. Take him away, boys." "Yes, General Farragut." As they walked out of Grey's house, a soldier stopped them to get a visual ID. "Okay, for Jason, 5'1", tall, thin build, pug nose, brown bangs, innocent attitude. Okay, then we got Grey, 6'1", guess medium build, brown gray, close crop hair, hawk nose, impulsive attitude, 45-ish. "Excuse me," exclaimed Grey. "That's 35-ish." "Whatever," replied the soldier. Grey and Jason were thrown in the back of the armored car that had no windows. From the sudden motion of the car, Grey could tell the car was being driven. To where? He could only guess. The ride in the armored car seemed to last a lifetime. It was pitch black inside, and apparently the road was very bumpy. Jason breathed a long sigh. Grey turned to Jason, or at least in his general direction because of how dark it was. "Jason," he began, I don't know what the SWAT has against me, but there's no reason that they had to drag you into this. And for that, I am sorry. Jason didn't respond, but Laurence understood. Finally, Jason said, Well, did you do anything, Dad? No, of course not, Jason, said Grey, somewhat miffed that his own son would think that his own father, a police officer, would commit a crime. But of course, the SWAT doesn't just come in and arrest you like that. Like, it has to be pretty bad for them to do that. In fact, my own precinct would be the ones arresting me if it was a smaller crime. Not that I even did that. But all this got Grey thinking, why would the SWAT take all this trouble to arrest him if he didn't do anything wrong? And perhaps that in itself was the very thing. After several more hours in the armored car, Grey finally came to his senses. You know what, son? Said Grey all of a sudden. Jay sighed, annoyed. What now, Dad? Well, you know what? It's time to get out of here, exclaimed Grey. What, do you think the SWAT will just leave it unlocked? Let me say that again. What, do you think the SWAT will just have left the door unlocked? Said the exasperated Jason. Laurence felt in the dark for the car door and gave it a good kick. Sure enough, the door was unlocked. Of course, though, the armored car was still moving at, Grey guessed, a good 70 miles an hour. It seems like they were in a desert area with no large cities or even a small town in sight. The time was 7 p.m., so it was late dusk, some landscapes features still visible, but in general, still pretty dark. Grey, now able to see Jason, turned to the ladder and raised his eyebrows. Jason laughed. Grey said, Okay, son, remember what I told you about the tuck and roll? Yes, said Jason, but that was for cars going about 40 miles an hour. I don't know if we can do it for this fast. Grey thought about it. Well, seems like that's our only choice. I'll go first, and then you jump out no later than 2 seconds after me. Jason looked uncertain, fearful, but in the end, seemed like he would trust his dad's wisdom. Laurence gripped Jason's hand, then let go and breathed, Are you ready? Jason nodded, and with that, Laurence Grey leapt out of the armored car and hit the ground hard, tumbling many times before stopping next to a tumbleweed. Grey was bruised, but in good shape and free. Jason, meanwhile, should have jumped by now. Grey turned to see the armored car drive away and eventually fade from view with Grey's son still in it. From just foolish thinking, Grey had lost his son. He couldn't go to the law. He is a fugitive. What would they do to his son? Jason had meant to jump out, really, but right after his dad, a big bump in the road shook the car and slammed the car doors shut. The doors weren't locked, but they shut so hard that they were jammed. Jason had no window to look out of, but he could imagine his dad on the desert floor, fading into the distance. They were now both alone. Grey continued to stare down the road where the armored car had been 10 minutes ago. He couldn't believe his son had been taken away with him, and now Jason continued the unwilling participation trip on his own. Grey called a friend to come pick him up. The SWAT had a phone reception blocking satellite for the armored car, so Grey was allowed to keep his phone. It didn't matter, he couldn't call anyone. Now that the car was gone, Grey had reception again. His phone GPS told him that he was still in Connecticut, but on the outskirts of a minor city named Tubb. Grey told his friend how to find him, and then sat down to wait. Mr. Jack Larrabee, a journalist for the Hartford Times, who also happened to be a taxi driver, careened at 90 miles an hour towards Laurence Grey. He practically ran Grey over with his car. Jack was a shortish man, about 5'8", and slightly overweight. He was 47 years old, compared to Grey being 35, and Jack always wore a brown suit with a checkered red tie, which really didn't match. Jack left out of the taxi and slapped Grey on the back and said, Why, Larry, it's been 2 years since I've seen you. What in pancake's name are you doing here in the middle of the desert? Jack had always been outgoing. Laurence sighed, then said, First of all, it's not Larry, it's Laurence. Secondly, it's a really long story, so I prefer not to talk about it. Grey and Larrabee both got in the taxi and started driving back towards the city of Tubb. After about an hour of driving, Grey was finally ready to talk about it. And after an hour of driving, Grey had finished his story. And now the government has Jason, and I can't do anything about it without being caught myself. Jack thought for a moment and then said, Wow, that's a toughie. Well, what I think you should do is first find out why the SWAT were after you. I mean, SWAT, come on. They really should have sent your own precinct, much less the SWAT. I wonder what got them so mad. Laurence was at a loss. He also had no idea, but he was going to find out. Man, bit by bit, we are moving through this book, but it is still inch by inch, guys. You probably thought that, oh, Jason was going to get saved really quickly, but nope, that's too soon because right now we just saw Lawrence team up with his friend Jack. So, is his friend Jack going to help him or is he just going to be a hindrance? He doesn't seem to be the most intelligent guy. So, you're just going to have to find out next week in Chapter 8 as we continue this incredible book, guys. All right, I'll see you then.